Hey guys, I'm Gracie. I don't go to Providence, I go to Fletcher, but I'm a senior. And I want to start out tonight by asking you guys a question. Which one do you think is worse? Do you think it's worse to spread a rumor about someone? Or do you think it's worse to hear a rumor about someone and not say anything to stop it? So if you think the first one, spreading a rumor, raise your hand. Okay, and if you think the second one, hearing a rumor and then not saying anything to stop it, raise your hand. Okay, not everybody participated, but if I'm being completely honest, I don't think it really matters which one's worse because we all know they're both wrong, right? I'd be pretty upset if somebody did either one of those to me. So when we read James 4:17, it says, "So whoever knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, for him it is a sin." So James is saying, we can be sinning by not doing something. I know that when I think of sins, usually I think of stuff that I do against him, right? I think of sins of commission, doing what God has told us not to do. This is stuff like underage drinking, sex before marriage, murder, stealing, right? Pretty basic ideas. But what James is talking about is a sin of omission, not doing what God has called you to do. This is not praying over someone, not sharing the gospel or your testimony with people when you feel like he's called you to do it. So my goal for tonight is for us to think less about what we shouldn't do and more about what God is asking us to do. And a way to kind of think of this in terms of the Bible is the parable of the Good Samaritan. A lot of us have heard this before, but a man had just been robbed, beaten up. He's like bloody, bruised, disgusting, right? And so we have two religious leaders walking by, and you would think, oh, they're religious people, they're going to stop and help him out. But they don't. And we read this and we're like, oh, they're so prideful. But in reality, they were focusing on what they shouldn't do. To them, if they touch someone who's unclean, it makes them unclean also. And then we have a Samaritan come by. And Samaritans and Jewish people do not get along, right? Jewish people viewed Samaritans as being far from God. But what does he do? He stops and he helps him. The person that we would think is the furthest from God shows exactly what a relationship with him is supposed to look like. He thought less about what he shouldn't do and more about what God was asking him to do. A lot of the times we're like the religious leaders, right? We decide like, oh, I need to make sure I don't do any of this stuff so that God can be proud of me. I can't drink, or I can't have sex or murder. Yes, that's things that God doesn't want you to do for a reason, but the same way that those can cause us to feel far from God, so can not listening to the Holy Spirit. I like to think of it like this. If I just entered into my relationship with God, I want to be as close to him as possible. So maybe to get a closer relationship with him, I won't murder anyone. That's great, right? But there's plenty of people who don't have a relationship with God who don't murder people. Or what if I decide that I'm not going to drink until I'm 21? Also, great. God does not want you to do that. But it's still, there's plenty of people who don't have a relationship with him that don't do it. So what if, to get a close relationship with him, I pray over someone when he calls me to do it? When you get like that heartbeat in your chest and you're like, oh gosh, I don't know if I can do this. Or what if I get up on stage and I do a rise up and share my testimony, even though I get super embarrassed and awkward to talk in front of a bunch of people? Or I wake up early on a Saturday or a Sunday and volunteer, even though I'd rather be sleeping in. Eventually, we take these steps of obedience and we're walking side by side with God, right? And the funny thing about it is that when we focus on what God is calling us to do, it naturally leads us away from what we shouldn't. I mean, hopefully God's never going to tell you to steal from someone or to murder someone, right? So if our goal is to be in a close relationship with God, the path is through everyday obedience. And what does being obedient look like? I know for me, God's never screaming in my face, Gracie, I need you to do this right now. But if we read his word, we realize that he's always calling us to love. Serving and loving God in obedience involves serving and loving everyone. So my goal for us this week is, or honestly throughout the rest of your life, if I'm being completely honest, is to, every time you enter a room or space, ask yourself, what is God asking me to do right now? Or what is the most loving thing to do right now? Maybe that is praying over someone, or maybe it is doing a rise up, or maybe it's just sitting next to someone you don't know, or maybe it's doing the dishes for your parents, right? Whatever your way of loving people is, because that's being obedient to God. So I just want to end off by saying one more time, let's start living our lives thinking less about what we shouldn't do and more about what God is calling us to do. Thank you.